think the best introduction I can give our guests today comes from the back cover of their amazing book, The Courage to Face COVID-19. It was written by a Pulitzer Prize nominee, Michael Cabuzzo, and it says, Dr. Peter McCullough is a hero for our time and all times. When the world collapsed from the COVID-19 pandemic, he led the 500 doctors who saved the world and saved millions of people with his global research and at the bedside with his own hands. When government health agencies and Big Pharma failed to do their job and lied about repurposed drugs that could end the pandemic, he did their job and he called them out. When reporters and editors failed to do their job and launched the largest propaganda campaign in history to cover up the lies, he did their job and told the truth about the lives lost and the vast human suffering. Instead of giving him a Nobel Prize, they tried to destroy him. If you can read, you must read this powerful book that he wrote with author John Leake, one of the few journalists with the talent and courage to tell the truth about the pandemic. Their job has just begun. We have both of them in the Economic War Room. Welcome, Dr. McCullough. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
This is a powerful book. I read it. I highlighted all the way through. It's not a hard read. It tells, you've got a true crime background. It tells kind of a true crime story. So it's fascinating from that perspective. Anybody that loves true crime can read this book and get something meaningful out of it. And it reminds me of the unreal things that happened just such a short time ago. It provides a direction, though, which is nice for what we can do to avoid the catastrophe in the future. And I wanted to get it in your words. We'll do 3 segments, the bad, the good, and the beautiful. So tell us, what happened with COVID-19?
John does a wonderful job, in a sense, narrating a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The book, it does have flashbacks in history, which I think are extremely useful, that when the medical community historically has been confronted with a new challenge, a novelty, a controversy, the answers have never come from the establishment. They've never come from the orthodoxy.
This is the discovery when you study medical history, is every time mankind has been confronted with something that our medical people don't understand, it's always a creative, discerning individual, maybe working and with some of his discerning colleagues, that discover the way forward. It's not some committee in Washington, D.C.
Well, what's really frustrating to me is I read the book, The Great Influenza, during the pandemic, and The Great Influenza is about the Spanish flu. And I saw so many examples of mistakes that we made again, having known better. I mean, they did masking and isolation and vaccines and all those things, and none of the orthodoxy and the answers that they gave seemed to deal with that. And it seems like, don't we learn anything?
Think about the assumption. The assumption was, if I do all these things, I won't get the illness. Now we have serologic data where virtually every person got SARS-CoV-2 infection. No one dodged it.
So, well, and if I could just add to that, I mean, we should remember that the initial messaging from Washington was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Now, what does that mean, flatten the curve? It means to slow down the rate of hospitalizations so that hospitals won't be overrun. But from the outset, the original messaging was this thing is beyond containment. Everyone is going to be exposed to this. We just want to slow down the rate of serious illness so that hospital capacity...
Well, see, I could buy off on the idea. Let's go home for 2 weeks. Let's stop work for 2 weeks. That's for the social good. I can do that. But if they'd sold it to people, you're going to be locked in your home for 2 years. You won't be able to see ill relatives and even be with them when they die. If they told them, we're not going to allow you to treat this early or do anything about it till you end up in the hospital and then you're probably going to die. If they told us that, we would have had a revolt. But once they isolated us and separated, I interviewed Stella Morabito, who wrote The Weaponization of Loneliness, talking about how when you isolate people, then you can break them down, you can manipulate them, you can control them. It seems like that's what happened.
It's true. Going back to the assumptions. So the next assumption was the virus is unassailable, it's untreatable. From the very beginning, we were told from experts from Washington and in academic medical centers, it's untreatable. What a dangerous assumption, because some people died of this illness. We should never assume it's untreatable from the outset. We ought to say it is treatable, let's try.
Yeah, this is where I examine a theory or an interpretive framework, viewing this in the language of criminal investigations, in this case, organized crime. We have to consider the possibility of, at the bare minimum, negligent homicide. Because in what emergency do you just say, you know, nothing works, we're going to categorically state this from the outset, a priori, nothing works, so don't even try to help people. And in the case of Dr. McCullough, he wasn't proposing to help his patients in some radical way. It was, well, how would you characterize the protocol? What were these agents?
Within a few weeks, we realized there was a viral phase. People got sick, nasal congestion like any cold, but then something changed in the lungs, what's called inflammation or cytokine storm, and then rapidly reports where people are developing blood clots. We've never seen an infection that causes blood clots. That was the unique thing about it, but that was known pretty quickly. So as we sketched out these phases, we need something to manage the virus, something to handle inflammation, and something to manage blood clots from the outset. And that was the idea of having a multi-drug approach, not unlike we would do for other complicated infections. The most interesting thing was this was going on in Dallas. So we had myself and Brian Proctor and McKinney, Azet Lozano in Dallas, key leaders in Houston. Texas was actually pretty good in response. But we also had Didier Riault in France. We had Vladimir Zelenko in Monroe, New York. So people Brian Tyson and George Freed in South Central California. So people were working separately all over the world using multi-drug protocols. Our colleagues in Asia, which was so interesting, were using poultices and aromatic substances, other naturopathic approaches. And when I talked to them, they said, we're doing the same thing we did with the Spanish flu. All we have to do is basically let the patient get some modest relief, and the human body will bring itself through the illness. What we saw with the orthodoxy was, no, not a single milligram of treatment. Come in the hospital, still don't get treated, until we're down to needing oxygen and then start the first milligram of treatment, and I can tell you it was too late.
Well, one of the things I read in the book that just frustrated me was that there are things you could treat with, but you waited until they wouldn't be effective to use them. All right, we're going to need to take a break. When we come back, let's talk a little more about why this happened, what the establishment is doing, what was their motive, and so forth. And then let's end with what can we do in the future? Where do we have hope? In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com.
Oh, hi, I'm Kevin Freeman, and I'm here to tell you about coffee. Well, not really, but I'm going to use coffee to illustrate my point. Here we have several different coffees, each with its own unique characteristics. First, we have instant coffee. This coffee pretends to be coffee, but it's not really coffee at all. It's a fraud. Plus, it tastes terrible. I'm out. Next, we have woke coffee. Their coffee actually tastes pretty good, until you find out that when you drink it, you have to admit that you've oppressed other coffees in the past. Insanity. I'm out. Next, we have Big Tech Coffee. Now, these guys used to encourage folks to share with others what they thought about their coffee. But now, if you say you don't like Big Tech Coffee, they'll take away your coffee pot. I'm out. this brings us to Patriot Mobile Coffee, right? This is one big cup of truth and freedom. There's no fraud here. Patriot Mobile is America's real Christian conservative wireless provider. Patriot Mobile gives back millions of dollars every year to organizations that are on the front lines fighting for our freedoms. Patriot Mobile offers the best nationwide 4G and 5G coverage on the same networks as the other major carriers. So you'll get the same great coverage, along with 100% US-based customer support, while knowing you are supporting a company that shares your conservative values. Switch to Patriot Mobile today by visiting patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
We're speaking with Dr. Peter McCullough. Yeah, that doctor, the one that's the hero, that, you know, the one I saw on YouTube, and you probably did too before they tried to pull him down. And also with John Leake, who wrote this incredible book that tells the story of what happened in COVID-19. And we've learned that there were treatments that many quality physicians around the country were using successfully, but the medical establishment refused to actually implement that as a strategy. And as a result, lots of people died. We called it a true crime, maybe negligent homicide or worse. Could it possibly? It sounds like a conspiracy. It sounds like, why would you stop? You're one of the most best-known physicians in Texas, in the United States, but particularly in Dallas. I mean, you're the guy that you'd read. You get the airline magazine, and, you know, top physician. There you were at the top of your hospital and so forth. Was there a conspiracy involved here?
I think initially it was fear. Doctors were gripped in fear. We had reports out of Italy where some Italian doctors had died, elderly doctors. We don't know the context. But I think initially, listening to all the conference calls that we had on pandemic response, do you know most of them were about personal protective equipment, masks, locking down, reverse ventilation? None of them were about treating patients. So actually, most of the conversation early was, how do we protect ourselves? People were thinking about themselves, not the patients.
I would argue that within a certain stratum of pandemic planning and execution, it was a conspiracy. And I say this not presenting a theory. The evidence is clear. The clearest piece of evidence of an organized conspiracy is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation's preliminary business plan. This was an institution founded by the Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum.
Gates, like Bill Gates.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the business plan that was published in early 2017 by CEPI, that's CEPI, states it's like a prospectus for its investors, another pandemic is coming, not a matter of if, just a matter of when. And when it does, CEPI proposes a 100% vaccine solution.
Wait, before we've had a pandemic.
Well, I mean, the claim is that emerging infectious diseases, they pop up from time to time.
Well, that's true.
So the assumption is it will be a respiratory viral illness, and the solution will be a rapidly developed vaccine solution. And if you read CEPI's preliminary business plan, there's not a word mentioned about treatment. So I believe, as an investigative starting point, if you look at that business plan and you look at some of these pandemic planning simulations like Johns Hopkins University Event 201, you see this was an arrangement, a plan, a battle plan that was going to be executed when we get the next pandemic, and the solution will be 100% in the most monolithic way a vaccine solution.
Which is frightening because, number one, you said there are effective treatments that you could use at various stages, and there are drugs that exist that are already approved that we could use for that. But two, I remember as a kid, they said there's this big new thing called swine flu, and we're all going to have to go take shots. And I hated shots. And I did everything, and I was so glad when I read in Time magazine how they decided to stop that vaccination program. But here, they're pre-planning, and vaccinations didn't work in 1918 or whenever the Spanish flu was either.
Well, think of the von Schlieffen plan for World War I. So the German General Staff, von Schlieffen being one of the biggest planners, he had a plan. He said, war is coming with France. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. They're still sullen about losing the Franco-Prussian War in 1872. When it comes, this is the plan. And so I think you have to look at this hypothetical pandemic is like a hypothetical war. And when it comes, there's going to be military discipline in executing the plan that we already have in place. And anyone that gets in the way of it is going to be squashed.
Remember, the PrEP Act uses military terms. 2005 was written. It says pandemics are coming and that we will be invaded by a pathogen, a virus, bacteria, fungi, and there will be countermeasures. Government countermeasures. That's written into the PrEP Act in 2005. Vaccines are countermeasures. Importantly, they'll be immune from liability.
Wow, immune from liability. That's critical because the reason they pulled the swine flu vaccine was it was dangerous. It was bad.
That was Gerald Ford's signature program, and it was several dozen deaths, about 500 cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome. No Twitter, no vaccine event reporting system, no data systems, just good old common sense. 1976. Pull it off the market and offer compensation to those who were injured.
Well, here's the problem with that. It was Gerald Ford's signature program. It's like, I want to go down as a legacy, the politicians getting involved. Now, we hear this all the time. Don't get between me and my doctor, right? That's a big mantra. But that's exactly what they did. They got between people and their doctors, and they told you doctors what you could and could not do. And if you did what they said you couldn't do, they ruined your reputation.
That's where it came. Basically, the federal agencies fractured the fiduciary relationship between a doctor and a patient. That's a sacred relationship. The doctor thinks, I think this is best for you. The patient says, I understand the risks and benefits. Treat and take care of that patient. Each patient is unique. They have their own wishes, their own desires, their own sensitivities. And the government got in there for the first time and literally just broke it in half and said, doctor, don't you dare do this. The interesting thing is it happened all over the world simultaneously.
Wow.
And the other thing I would add to that is the way the propaganda messaging that was packaged up in order to subvert, undermine, and destroy doctors like Dr. McCullough. It was invoking the old frontier, the medicine showman from the frontier, the snake oil salesman, as though someone who has all of his training, expertise, leadership of major medical centers is analogous to a medicine showman in 1880 in South Dakota. I mean, when you gave your Senate testimony in 2020, will you tell it? How did the New York Times characterize you and Harvey Risch, a Yale epidemiologist?
Well, myself, I was at Baylor at the time, Harvey Risch from Yale, and George Freed, former NIH and Harvard. We had both testified that we could treat the illness. We all you could say we do it. The minority witness, and we were for Ron Johnson, the minority witness was Gary Peters, the minority witness Ashish Jha, who became the coronavirus coordinator. He said, in a pre-planned hit job afterwards, that we were the snake oil salesman of the Senate.
Wow. We're going to have to carry this over beyond the break. But the idea is the snake oil salesmen are the one that were making all the money off of it, and you were promoting things that didn't make a lot of money. We'll be right back after the break. Here's a $10 bill. It's got the picture of Alexander Hamilton on the front of it. It's kind of sad. When I was 10 years old, everything that I could buy for $1 now costs about $10. That's the cost of inflation. It's just paper. It's not backed by anything. You can't exchange it for gold and silver. You used to, but you can't do that anymore. And that's unfortunate. Pirates wouldn't accept this. Pirates, they wanted gold and silver. Patriots, the founders of this nation, also wanted gold and silver coin. In fact, they put a provision in the Constitution, 17 words, that said states could only make gold and silver coins tender within the states. That's why I wrote this new book, Pirate Money, Discovering the Founders' Hidden Plan for Economic Justice and Defeating the Great Reset. It will explain exactly the history of money and exactly why gold and silver coins can be made modern with new technology and a useful monetary system. PirateMoneyBook.com.
I'm Kevin Sorbo. When you spend money, you consider who you're buying from and the causes they support. If you don't, then you're likely supporting companies that are trying to destroy our country and take away our freedoms. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They're a cell phone company and a good one. They offer nationwide coverage on the best 4G and 5G networks along with 100% US-based customer support. But here's the deal. Patriot Mobile's mission has nothing to do with cell phones. They carry out their mission by giving back millions of dollars every year to Christian conservative causes that are actively engaged in the fight to save America. Voting is no longer enough to beat the woke. We have to band together, support like-minded companies, and vote with our dollars. That's how we win. Stop supporting companies that want to destroy America and join Patriot Mobile today by visiting patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
Okay, before the break, you mentioned the term snake oil that was applied to you after your congressional testimony. And the bottom line is, how much money do you make as the patent holder on hydroxychloroquine?
Yeah, I don't hold any patents. I personally don't hold any patents, but whatever they are, they've long served out their royalty periods.
Ivermectin, you make a lot of money off the fact that ivermectin is successful as a treatment?
These are typically $3 to $10 drugs.
What about the people that make the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, well, CEPI, their preliminary business plan, they they came through with their promise to their investors. I mean, this whole business of vaccine countermeasures, and remember that word, it's very important. It's not a pharmaceutical product. It is pursuant to the PrEP Act of 2005, it is an emergency countermeasure that the United States government pre-purchases, distributes to the entire population, and absolves the creator of the substance from any liability. So this means, let's take Pfizer and Moderna. They had no marketing costs, they had no liability. They didn't have to make a market. The US government pre-purchased all of it. European Union. The European Union purchased 1.9 billion doses of Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The whole deal was negotiated in secret between Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in secret by text message, and we still don't know what this man and woman communicated with each other.
Billions and billions of dollars.
And billions of dollars.
It's politics and greed combined. So which one had a greater, I know this was used politically. I mean, President Trump gets on and mentions hydroxychloroquine. He's not a doctor. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But essentially, he was right. It does have some efficacy.
He was citing a paper that had just been published by Didier Raoult in France, who's the most published microbiologist in Europe. So Donald Trump wasn't pretending to be a doctor. Someone on his staff said, this professor in Marseille is a great microbiologist who's just published this paper. Trump was just citing medical literature.
But it got highly politicized. I mean, the whole, you're not a horse, you're not a pig, stop taking ivermectin. I mean, which is nonsense. I mean, doctors prescribe things off-label all the time, don't you?
We do. In fact, the majority of drugs, the original advertising label decades ago could have anticipated a COVID pandemic. So of course it's off-label. And the FDA, in 2018, they have some guidance right on their website, says use drugs off-label when you're fulfilling an unmet need, and that's what we are doing.
You know, I've read something in the book, I think, if I caught it correctly, if it had been an experimental drug that had not gone through clinical trial testing and approval, that these could be used for emergency use authorization. But because it had been approved, I think I read that in your book, because it had been approved that they were denying the use of it.
Yeah, these strange lawyer dodges and paradoxes. I mean, hydroxychloroquine was FDA approved in 1955 for malaria, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus. In the year 2015, the guys that discovered and developed ivermectin were awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine, human and veterinarian, and ivermectin was lauded a wonder drug. There is a statue of Satoshi Omura in front of the WHO building in Geneva, one of the great healers in all of human history. They just flipped this thing around and smeared ivermectin, a wonder drug. Billions of doses taken and tolerated every year.
But remember, it's not just ivermectin. Our book outlines even simple nasal sprays and gargles were attacked. Vitamin D was attacked. High-tech products like monoclonal antibodies turned out that they were impeded and pulled off the market within a few weeks. So it wasn't just
anything that got in the way of the vaccine.
That's
the
it.
vaccine.
So what happens next? I saw just not long ago monkeypox is the next pandemic, and I think you had a great deal to do with waking people up. No, this is nonsense.
Right. So monkeypox, President Biden declares it a national emergency. Bashir declares it a public health emergency. Immediately, the government pre-purchases vaccines. Here we go again. Turns out we had a very useful drug called tecovirimat. The patients who got it was a rash. They were treated. It was well managed. We had cases here in Dallas. And before we knew it, we settled down the fear in the nation. The whole nation didn't have to take a monkeypox vaccine. Now we're being told it's disease X. There's going to be a new disease X. CEPI has a white paper out saying the strategy will be a disease X vaccine. We have biolabs working on the development of disease X, the new infectious organism, and the answer, the vaccine, and the lab and the countries that hold these assets, they hold power.
Wow. Is bird flu going to be it? Because I see a little rumblings on bird flu.
Bird flu may be it. We're preparing for the possibility. Now, Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, they say bird flu will be disease X. Disease X looks like it's timed if it's avian influenza. Probably not a human threat nearly so much as it is to farming. We're seeing mass culling of flocks of birds. There have been vaccination elsewhere around the world that has failed. Now potentially a food scare right before the WHO meetings and right before the U.S. presidential
food scare.
elections.
I know they're culling cattle, birds. So take beef and chicken off the menu, right? If this bird flu gets out. All right. So through all of that, what can we do about it? What should we be doing about it? And what gives you hope?
Everybody should do their own research, number one. I think they should seek a variety of opinions. I've aligned with the Wellness Company as the Chief Scientific Officer. We have a variety of emergency kits. I think people should not take at face value that what they're being told by the government is the truth or necessarily the right thing to do.
Okay, step one is everybody should read The Courage to Face COVID-19 because that brings you up to speed where you can discuss in a rational way, even with medical professionals or politicians. Then you need to make your voices heard. You need to tell people, hey, look, I'm not going to take it anymore. It's like that old network movie. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Stop lying to us. And the next thing you do is exactly what Dr. McCullough said, is do your own research. Talk to your physician. Say, I don't want this top-down thing. I want you to care about me as an individual. All right, what's the best way to follow what you're doing?
PeterMcCulloughMD.com. That'll take you everywhere. Our Courageous Discourse Substack, America Out Loud Talk Radio, McCullough Report, our book, Courage to Face COVID-19. We are out there and we're here to bring the country and the world the truth and to be ready for what comes next.
Well, we want to help you in your mission and we want to thank you for what you're doing. Hey, we're going to summarize all this in our free economic battle plan. You can get a copy at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.